this is where we're going to start. Just take a minute to read that. Have a look. Okay, and if you're feeling brave, tell the person next to you what you just read. You don't need to tell me. Okay, and if you said I haven't got a clue, that's fine. Some of you might have said it's about some strange creatures who got what they deserved, what was coming their way. You might have been able to have picked out some of the words. And that's essentially, when we put a text of any kind in front of our children, that's what we're asking them to do in the very early stages. It's gobbledygook. It's just shapes on a page that we say to them have got this mystical meaning attached to them, behind them. But actually, if you're going to look at this as objectively as you possibly can, without any, previous knowledge and understanding, it's just squiggles on a page. That's all that is. But what we do to those squiggles on a page is attach some meaning to them and some order to them to make sense. So when we're asking our children to read, it's basically for them to look at those shapes on the page and tell us what they mean. It's cracking a code. For those of us that did have some kind of idea about what that was all about, these are some of the clues that you used, whether you realised it or not. You read it, in inverted commas, and just kind of knew. It just kind of somehow made sense, because you're a grown-up, you've got many, many years of experience of speaking the language that you just read, of reading the language that you just read, and writing that language that you just read. So you just know, you just have this innate feel for, in that case, English and gobbledygook language. You also know how the world around you works. There were certain clues in there that you might have picked out, or he had it coming to him. There was a this, and a this, and they were that. So it's about things, it was about nouns, things that exist on the planet. So you use your knowledge and understanding of the world to make sense of what you read. Hopefully I'll join all these dots as we go along. You also know how language works, the patterns of sentences. I ran learning German and went with a little bit of Welsh that I've learned. Where you put words in a sentence is very different in English and German, in English, German and Welsh. There are different rules for every language. You know about patterns in words. So there we were talking about knowledge and understanding of the world, syntax, the whole pattern of language and story and narrative, how it sits together in chronological order, how sentences are organised. You also know that if you know what the word looks like, that's an unfortunate example. You know what book, you could work out what book is, you can work out what cook is, and so on. There are patterns in words that would have helped you figure that out. And then if you filter that down even more, you know like individual letters and the sounds that they represent. So you would use lots of these cues to help you figure out what that text meant, and then finally you'll use punctuation. You know that when that dot on the page means that everything that started before it and up to it is about one thing, and then you move on to find out about something else. So that's how we, those of us as successfully or otherwise, unpick that text. There were lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of things going on there concurrently that you might not even realise you were using to unpick that text, to make sense of what you read. Reading and writing is all about sound. If you can't hear things, you will really, really struggle to read and to write. So all of this phonics that we're going to be looking at today starts with sound. If you can't hear it, you're really, really going to struggle with reading and writing. So prior to what phonics is, and I promise I am going to get there, I am going to tell you what phonics is all about, you need to be aware that before that is something that we talk about called phonological awareness, and it's just about being aware of sound, that you are able to play with sounds, that you've got this acute awareness of sound around you, because when you read and you write, you are transferring that sound into a symbol, or you're looking at a symbol and transferring it back into a sound. Do you see what I mean? So they are really, really linked. Thinking about phonological awareness, what do we need to do before we can even start thinking about what phonics is and how they help us with reading and writing? Well, first of all, from a tiny age, when they're babes in arms, can children locate sounds? Do they know the source of the sound? Do they know where the sound is coming from? So you know, if you've had, I'm not a parent, I think they'd arrest me if they knew I was going to have children. If you've got a babe in your arms and you take them for those early tests, they'll put a rattle behind the back or whatever it is that they do. Can the child hear, first of all? Do they turn their head to the direction that sound came from? So right from when children are tiny weeny, this is the first start of learning to have that control, that command of language. So can they locate a sound? Do they know what makes which sound? Are they able to pick out, discriminate different sounds? So if you take them for a walk, can they tell you, that was a duck, that was a duck? Can they tell you, it was a pig? This is being filmed, brilliant. Are they able to tell you all these different sounds around you? Are they able to discriminate one from another? They might not necessarily, and why would they with those sounds? Know that that noise was the noise that the pig makes. If they tell you a cat, then, you might be worried, but they know that it's different to meow. So that they know that there are different sounds, okay? We need that right from the word go. So as you're walking along the street, oh, that was a car I just heard, or oh, that bird's very noisy. Can they do all of that? Are you using instruments around them? I know my nephews, when they were younger, not so much now, but they loved, maybe they just like the noise, but it's all part of this. Are they interested in making a noise with drums and rattles and banging with saucepans? And when they experiment with that, with volume and different pitches and so on, all of that's absolutely essential to them developing this awareness of what sound is around them. And body percussion, they do start to stop it, but actually, time and a place, it's good. It's all about this rhythm and language for sound. This next bit, rhythm and rhyme, again, all of this is fundamental. But there are children that I work with who have missed out on this at a young age, much to the detriment of their language development. Their ability to read and write has been hampered because they've missed out this phonological bit about understanding about what a rhythm is and what rhyming words are. There is a study conducted in Canada, I believe, in the 80s. Two groups of students who were very, very similar, had a very, very, very similar curriculum, learning and teaching experiences. One group was given 20 minutes work on rhythm and rhyme, just having poems read to them, stories, making up rhymes, rhyming games, 20 minutes a week, that was it, for about 18 months. And then when their progress was measured, and the other class didn't, and when their progress was measured a few years on, and every other situation that they could possibly control was the same, that group that had the work on rhyme, their progress was years above their contemporaries. Because it's all about this, going back to this innate understanding of what language feels like, how language works. And going back to that awful example that I used earlier, if you know what look looks like, you know that look sounds like book. Therefore, if I see another word that looks like look, it could be book, it could be cook, and so on. So this is where all these dots start joining up. It's absolutely essential that you sing nursery rhymes to your children, that they learn all those little games, those playground games that we used to play when we were little. They might seem a little bit old-fashioned now, but actually they are very, very, very important. And I'm not on commission, but these books are wonderful. You can get, I'm sure you've got them. Julia Donaldson, there are lots and lots of them. These are just some that I had to hand. You can get these in Asda now. 2 of her books were £7, so they're quite accessible. But all of these, if you're not aware of them, she writes most of the books in rhyme. And the children just pick it up and they learn it. So can they identify a rhyme? Can they complete a rhyme and generate their own rhyme? They're the 3 stages of that. So please, if you only do one thing with your children, it's this. sing songs that rhyme, make up nonsense. I won't tell you the conversations I have with my nephew about poo and all the words that he can rhyme with it. Because he thinks poo's funny, he would, he was 5. So that's the word that he's latched onto, but it's helped him with rhyming. And I'm his auntie and I'm a teacher, and so are his parents, and so are his nan, and so he gets it. Not poo ran down his throat, yes, rhyme ran down his throat. It's really important. As is alliteration. You know when you play those Susie Sal's seashells, or I've got long, lovely, lickable legs. That's also wrong. Gosh, I'm not creating the right opinion on maybe I am. But what it also does is it encourages the children to just play with language and to be interested in it and involved in it and not to be frightened by it, which they often can be. So do all of these things. Voice sounds, muck around, play about, help them to realise that their voice is a powerful tool, because the way that you use your voice will be extremely important. Once they become more fluent readers, you don't just want them to read accurately, but like a robot. You want them to be able to use the intonation in their voice, just as they do when they speak, because that creates that internal narrative voice, that narrator's voice, that writer's voice. Sequencing, absolutely fundamental. And you'll know this if you're trying to get your child dressed, as you do with my nephew. He'll put his boots on and he'll be dressed, and then he'll realise that he needs to put his waterproofs on. So how is your child in their day-to-day sequencing of events around them? Could they tell you, obviously depending on their age, what was the first thing they did when they got out of bed, and what were the next 2 or 3 things they did prior to having their breakfast, and so on? So can they sequence ordinary everyday events? And I don't mean sit down and say, right, what was the first thing you did? But just in general conversation, what do they like at sequencing? Where that links with reading and writing is that if you want them to write a story, if you want them to write a set of instructions, they all have a very systematic format to them, don't they? They've got a clear beginning, middle and end. Likewise, if you take that back to word level, the word cat, let's imagine they're reading it, and you say to them, what's the first sound? They don't know what that word first means. They can't possibly tell you the first sound, the first letter is k. Do you see what I mean? So they need all that position, all that sequence in language. They need to know first, next, after that, middle, beginning, end, what was in front of it, what was after. All of that language is fundamental. Toy talk, robot speak, whatever you want to talk, say it. If you've been to one of these talks before, you will have heard it. This goes back to being able to identify, discriminate and sequence sounds. So if I said to you, okay, it's time for you to go and get your coat, I've segmented the word coat, k-o-t. To begin with, I would say, I need you to go and get your coat, and I would blend it back together for them, I'd put that word together. So when the children are used to doing that, and you would only do it with, to begin with, words that have just got 2 or 3 phonemes, 2 or 3 sounds in them. So you'd model that with them. Where is your sock? Sock. And once they're used to being able to listen to you put back together, they get it. You might then say, right now, where is your coat? And they would say, coat, and go and get it. And then the step on from that is that the child can pull things out of a bag and say, here is my toy. Okay, so they have to be able to identify sounds in the environment to be able to do that. This is my coat. They also need to be able to sequence. K was first, then it was O, and finally it was T. So that when you're asking them to write it, what was the first sound? Well, the first sound was K. Okay, they know it's K. Then the next challenge for them is knowing what that K looks like. And then the next challenge again is actually making the shape correctly. So reading and writing is really difficult, but if you can break it down into its tiny, tiny constituent parts, it makes the whole process